It is a curious thing, this constant turning inward of the human mind. We are all familiar with it, the endless loop of thoughts that revolve around our own desires, our troubles, our ambitions, and our fears. We often think that by concentrating on ourselves, we can find some sort of answer or peace. However, the more we do so, the further we drift from the very thing we seek true contentment. We think of ourselves constantly. In the quiet of our minds, our own wants and worries dominate the conversation. But in truth, this self-centeredness is not the gateway to happiness. Rather, it is the iron bars that imprison us. For the more we focus on ourselves, the more we measure our worth against the world's passing standards, and the more unsatisfied we become. We are not made to revolve in isolation. And this, I believe, is the first truth we must understand. The more we fixate on our own image, the more we lose the depth and richness of life itself. It may seem paradoxical, but self-preoccupation only leads us to a deep dissatisfaction. Imagine a room full of mirrors, each one reflecting only your image, without a single window to the outside world. Can you find joy in such a room? The endless reflections only remind you of your own limitations and insecurities. No contentment is found when we stop gazing at our own image and instead look beyond ourselves. It is through connection to others, through stepping outside of our own narrow circle of interests, that we discover the fullness of life. The danger of narcissism, of excessive self-love, is that it breeds a heart that is blind to the needs of others. We become prisoners of our own minds, unable to see or care for the world around us. We may even convince ourselves that we are worthy of praise or admiration for our great self-sufficiency, but in truth we are becoming increasingly distant from the very people we are meant to love. We forget that we are not alone in our struggles, that others, too, are walking their own paths and fighting their own battles. When we think only of ourselves, we shut the door to any real connection. But what if we turned that gaze outward, even for just a moment? What if we stopped thinking of ourselves and began to serve others, to care for those around us? In this shift, we find the deep and enduring satisfaction that comes from self-forgetfulness. We begin to understand that life is not about fulfilling our personal desires, but about contributing to something greater than ourselves, whether it be our families, our communities, or the world at large. When we step out of our own shadows, we experience a profound joy that can never come from mere self-interest. We find that in giving we receive in selflessness. We discover our true purpose. It is when we stop thinking of ourselves that we are able to experience the fullness of life and to recognize the shared humanity that binds us all together. The nature of self-centeredness is one of the most fundamental, yet often overlooked, aspects of human behavior. We all carry within us the urge to focus on ourselves, to reflect on our own feelings, desires, and thoughts, perhaps as a means of understanding the world and finding a sense of control. Self-centeredness, in its simplest form, is the tendency to prioritize one's own needs, concerns, and perspective above all else. It often manifests as an inward focus, where every decision, thought, and action is primarily evaluated based on its effect on our own well-being. At first glance, this may seem natural and even necessary for survival after all. How can one make decisions without considering how they will affect oneself? But when self-centeredness becomes the dominant force in one's life, it can lead to a limited and distorted view of the world, leaving us isolated from others and ultimately from our true purpose. Human beings are creatures of reflection. We continuously process our experiences, comparing them to our desires, fears, and expectations. This constant inward gaze is a survival mechanism that helps us navigate our world, making choices that are meant to protect or promote our well-being. However, this introspective habit, when left unchecked, tends to spiral into a cycle of self-absorption. We begin to measure the value of everything in terms of how it relates to us, losing sight of the larger context and the richness of the human experience that extends beyond our own personal sphere. When self-centeredness takes root, it distorts how we see others. We become so focused on our own internal world that we fail to notice the feelings, needs, and experiences of those around us. Our interactions with others become transactional. We unconsciously assess what we stand to gain or lose from the exchange, whether it be emotional support, validation, or material benefit. People are no longer seen as complex individuals with their own lives, struggles, and perspectives, but rather as instruments that either serve our desires or obstruct them. This reduction of others to mere objects in the service of our own happiness creates a barrier to genuine human connection. The impact of self-centeredness goes beyond just how we relate to others. It also shapes how we view the world itself. A self-centered person is often hyper-aware of their own limitations, anxieties, and desires, and these feelings dominate their perception of reality. They interpret the world through the lens of their own experience, seeing every situation as it pertains to their own immediate comfort or discomfort. This leads to a narrow, often distorted view of life. For example, in the workplace, a person who is self-absorbed may interpret the actions of colleagues through the prism of personal competition, seeing others as threats rather than allies. Similarly, in social settings, they may measure interactions against their own need for validation, leaving little room for genuine empathy or understanding. The constant preoccupation with oneself not only limits our capacity for empathy, but also erodes our sense of perspective. When we are obsessed with our own worries or desires, they come to dominate our thoughts, pushing everything else into the background. The result is that we fail to see the world in its full complexity. We forget that other people are dealing with their own challenges, hopes, and pains. We forget that the world is a vast, interconnected place, where our actions ripple outwards and affect those around us, often in ways we cannot fully predict or control. The focus on our own problems, no matter how significant they may seem at the time, can cause us to lose sight of the greater picture. Self-centeredness can lead to an ongoing dissatisfaction with life. While it may seem that constantly thinking about our own desires should make us happy, the opposite often occurs. The more we focus on fulfilling our own needs and wants, the more we become aware of their insatiable nature. Our desires are not static, they are constantly shifting and growing, creating an endless cycle of craving that can never be truly satisfied. This is why, despite our best efforts to secure comfort, status, or wealth, we often find ourselves feeling unfulfilled, anxious, or even bored. Self-centeredness tricks us into thinking that fulfillment lies in the accumulation of personal achievements or possessions, but it is only through moving beyond the self that we can find genuine satisfaction. At its core, self-centeredness is an attempt to find security and meaning in a world that often feels chaotic and unpredictable. In focusing inwardly, we may feel that we have control, or that we can at least make sense of our own thoughts and emotions. But this focus on the self can only offer illusory comfort. True peace comes not from dwelling in the confines of our own mind, but from expanding our vision to include others, to recognize the shared experiences of humanity, and to see ourselves as part of a larger, interconnected world. The irony of self-centeredness is that, in seeking to prioritize and protect our own needs, we often end up further distanced from the very things that bring fulfillment, relationships, purpose, and meaning. By focusing on our own desires and struggles, we forget that life is not a solitary journey, but a shared experience. When we stop thinking only of ourselves, when we look outward toward others, we open ourselves to the fullness of human life, a life filled with connection, empathy, and a deeper sense of purpose that comes from serving something greater than ourselves. The paradox of self-preoccupation lies in the very nature of how our thoughts, intentions, and desires shape our experiences. On the surface, focusing on ourselves seems like a rational approach to achieving happiness and fulfillment. We are often taught that in order to be content, we must know ourselves, secure our own well-being, and ensure that our needs are met. This philosophy has a strong appeal after all. How can one provide for others or contribute meaningfully to the world without first addressing one's own concerns? Yet in practice, the more we obsess over our own desires and worries, the more likely we are to feel dissatisfied, unfulfilled, and disconnected from others. The very act of turning inward can limit our experience of life and deepen our sense of isolation, creating a vicious cycle where self-focus only exacerbates our unhappiness. One of the key aspects of this paradox is the way self-centeredness feeds into feelings of insecurity. The more we focus on ourselves, the more we begin to scrutinize our own thoughts, actions, and image. We become hyper-aware of how we are perceived by others, how we measure up in comparison to societal standards, and whether or not we are achieving the personal success we envision for ourselves. This constant self-assessment breeds anxiety. No matter how much we accumulate, whether it's wealth, status, or admiration, the sense of inadequacy remains. When we are preoccupied with ourselves, we are perpetually measuring ourselves against a moving target, and the satisfaction that comes from meeting these internal standards is fleeting at best. This sense of insecurity is compounded by the fact that the more we turn our attention inward, the more we tend to overlook the external world. Instead of interacting with the present moment, we are often caught in a mental loop, replaying past experiences or imagining future scenarios, all based on how they will affect us personally. This constant inner dialogue robs us of the ability to be fully present with others. We may attend a social gathering, for example, but our thoughts are preoccupied with how we are being perceived or whether others are judging us. In these moments, we are not truly engaging with the world around us. We are instead trapped in a self-constructed bubble of worry and doubt. The more we think about ourselves, the less we are able to engage authentically with life. Another ironic aspect of self-preoccupation is how it leads to feelings of isolation. The more we focus on ourselves, the more we unintentionally distance ourselves from others. As we fixate on our own needs and desires, we begin to see others primarily as a means to satisfy those needs. Relationships become transactional rather than genuine. We may not even realize it, but when we are thinking solely about ourselves, we tend to neglect the perspectives and needs of those around us. We view interactions through a lens of self-interest, and as a result, we lose the ability to form meaningful, reciprocal relationships. The very thing that is supposed to bring us closer to happiness, connecting with others, is diminished by the constant inner focus on self. Even when we engage in activities that seem to be outwardly directed, such as helping others or pursuing career goals, we may still be primarily motivated by the desire to enhance our own sense of worth or accomplishment. Many people, for example, pursue success or accolades not purely for the joy of contributing to a cause or to others, but because they believe that such achievements will bring them validation, admiration, or a sense of superiority. This form of self-centeredness masquerades as outward focus, but at its core, it is still driven by a desire to enhance one's own standing. What makes this paradox so difficult to recognize is that self-preoccupation is often justified by the belief that we must take care of ourselves first in order to be of service to others. This mindset suggests that self-improvement, personal development, and the pursuit of happiness are necessary prerequisites for meaningful engagement with the world. But in reality, the more we focus on improving ourselves in isolation, the more we disconnect from others. The very act of placing oneself at the center of our universe limits our ability to see the richness of life and the vast web of relationships that we are a part of. Self-obsession, disguised as self-care or self-improvement, inadvertently becomes a barrier to true connection and understanding. The danger of this paradox is that it leads to a perpetual cycle of dissatisfaction. The more we focus on what we lack, on what others have or what we think we need, the more discontented we become. Our desires expand in proportion to our attention, and instead of being content with what we have or what we can offer, we are constantly seeking more. We are trapped in a never-ending chase for external validation or material success, never pausing long enough to realize that the very pursuit of these things keeps us from experiencing the true joy of living. True contentment, it turns out, comes not from focusing on oneself, but from letting go of the need for constant self-affirmation. When we stop obsessing over our own needs and desires, we open ourselves to the fullness of life. This means engaging with others in a genuine way, not as objects to fulfill our desires, but as fellow human beings with their own dreams, struggles, and perspectives. It means embracing the world around us without constantly measuring it against our own expectations. By relinquishing the need to constantly turn inward, we are free to engage more fully with the world and the people in it. The paradox of self-preoccupation reveals that the more we focus on ourselves, the more we limit our experience of the world. We are not designed to live in isolation. We are made for connection, for engagement, and for service to others. When we shift our attention away from our own narrow concerns and instead embrace a broader perspective, we find a deeper, more lasting sense of fulfillment. The key to happiness, it seems, is not to chase it, but to stop thinking so much about ourselves and begin living for something greater. Narcissism, or excessive self-focus, has become an increasingly prevalent issue in modern society. While it is important to have a sense of self-worth and to take care of one's personal well-being, when this self-regard turns into an obsession, it can be deeply destructive. The dangers of narcissism extend far beyond individual psychology. They affect relationships, communities, and even societies as a whole. Narcissism distorts not only how we perceive others, but also how we interact with the world around us. In a narcissistic mindset, individuals view others primarily as tools or obstacles to their own success, validation, or pleasure. This lack of empathy and consideration for others creates an environment where genuine relationships are difficult, if not impossible, to form. At the heart of narcissism is an inflated sense of self-importance. Those who are narcissistic believe that they are inherently superior to others, deserving of special treatment, admiration, and privileges. This belief can manifest in various ways, from overt arrogance and entitlement to more subtle forms of self-centeredness, where the narcissist is primarily concerned with how they are perceived or whether their needs are met. This self-centered worldview leads to an inability or unwillingness to see others as equals or to recognize their unique experiences, perspectives, and needs. Instead, others become mere extensions of the narcissist's desires, valued only for what they can provide. As a result, relationships become transactional, with little room for mutual understanding, respect, or genuine emotional connection. One of the most damaging effects of narcissism is its impact on relationships. Whether in friendships, romantic partnerships, or professional settings, narcissistic individuals often struggle to form deep, meaningful connections. The narcissist's tendency to prioritize their own needs over others creates an imbalance in relationships. Their partners, friends, or colleagues are often left feeling neglected, unappreciated, or even manipulated. For example, in romantic relationships, a narcissist may expect constant admiration and validation without offering the same in return. They may become emotionally distant when they do not receive the attention they feel they deserve, or they may use others for their own gain, leaving a trail of emotional harm in their wake. In the workplace, a narcissistic colleague might take credit for the work of others, manipulate situations to their advantage, or belittle others to make themselves appear superior. In both cases, the narcissist's inability to recognize the value of others leads to a toxic, unbalanced dynamic that ultimately harms all parties involved. The lack of empathy in narcissistic individuals is one of the most telling signs of this harmful mindset. Narcissists are often unable to put themselves in the shoes of others or understand the emotional needs of those around them. This is not necessarily due to a lack of intelligence, but rather an inability or unwillingness to consider anyone else's feelings or perspective. They may appear charming and persuasive on the surface, using their charisma to manipulate or control others, but their relationships are ultimately shallow because they are driven by self-interest rather than genuine concern for others. This lack of empathy creates a void where emotional intimacy should be, and as a result, narcissistic individuals often find themselves lonely, despite being surrounded by people who may seem to admire or look up to them. The more they focus on themselves and their own needs, the more disconnected they become from the people around them. To damaging personal relationships, narcissism can lead to a broader sense of disconnection from society. A narcissist's worldview is often one of competition and comparison. They are constantly measuring their worth against others, believing that they are entitled to be at the top of the social hierarchy. This mindset fosters a culture of rivalry and division rather than cooperation and unity. In a narcissistic society, the value of an individual is determined not by their character or contribution, but by their ability to outshine or outperform others. This creates an environment where collaboration, empathy, and mutual support are undermined in favor of self-promotion and personal gain. Communities and organizations thrive when individuals come together to support one another, recognizing the importance of each person's role. Narcissism, however, undermines this cooperative spirit, focusing instead on individual success at the expense of collective well-being. The pursuit of admiration and validation can also have profound psychological consequences for narcissistic individuals. Constantly seeking external recognition and praise can become exhausting and ultimately unsatisfying. Since their self-worth is dependent on the approval of others, they are never truly content. Their happiness is fleeting and dependent on whether or not they are receiving the attention they crave. This leads to a cycle of perpetual dissatisfaction, as the narcissist is always looking for the next source of validation. Rather than cultivating an inner sense of fulfillment or self-acceptance, they remain trapped in a never-ending quest for affirmation. This quest may lead to feelings of emptiness, anxiety, and even depression, as the narcissist realizes that no amount of praise can fill the void they feel inside. Narcissistic individuals often struggle with personal growth and self-awareness. Because they are so focused on maintaining their image and seeking admiration, they tend to resist feedback or criticism. Instead of using constructive criticism as an opportunity for self-improvement, they view it as a personal attack. This defensiveness prevents them from developing the emotional intelligence or self-awareness necessary for meaningful growth. In relationships, this lack of self-reflection can lead to persistent patterns of dysfunctional behavior as the narcissist fails to recognize how their actions affect others. They remain stuck in their self-centered worldview, unable to break free from the patterns of manipulation and self-interest that govern their interactions. The ultimate danger of narcissism is that it leads individuals to live a life that is devoid of real connection and meaning. While it may offer temporary pleasures and external rewards, it prevents individuals from experiencing the true joy that comes from genuine relationships, empathy, and personal growth. A life lived solely in pursuit of one's own desires, without regard for the needs of others, becomes hollow and unsatisfying. Narcissism robs individuals of the deeper, more lasting satisfaction that arises from living in service to others, contributing to the greater good, and recognizing the shared humanity that binds us all. It creates a false sense of fulfillment, one that is never truly satisfying because it is rooted in self-interest rather than a broader, more interconnected sense of purpose. The ultimate consequence of a life dominated by self-centered thinking is the erosion of genuine happiness and contentment. At first glance, focusing on oneself seems to promise fulfillment. After all, if we are constantly attentive to our own needs and desires, it stands to reason that we should feel satisfied and content. However, this is far from the reality for those who live with a constant preoccupation with themselves. The more we focus on personal gain and immediate gratification, the more we lose sight of the true sources of lasting happiness, connection with others, meaning in our lives, and the cultivation of a sense of purpose beyond our own individual desires. The pursuit of self-centered goals often leads to an endless cycle of wanting more. This is not a new concept. Many philosophical traditions, from the teachings of Buddhism to the reflections of classical thinkers, have long warned of the dangers of greed and the insatiable nature of desire. When we focus too intently on satisfying our own wants, we fail to realize that these desires are, by their very nature, never fully satisfying. Each achievement, acquisition, or moment of recognition may bring a temporary sense of pleasure, but it quickly fades, leaving us feeling unfulfilled and wanting more. This cycle becomes self-perpetuating. When one desire is fulfilled, another rises to take its place, and so on, leading to an ever-increasing sense of dissatisfaction. One reason for this unrelenting dissatisfaction is the way self-centered thinking distorts our sense of what truly matters. We live in a culture that encourages individuals to pursue personal success, wealth, and status as the ultimate indicators of achievement. These external markers, while useful in some respects, often fail to address the deeper needs of the human soul. While accumulating material wealth or securing a higher social status may provide temporary satisfaction, they cannot offer the depth of meaning that comes from living a life of purpose, empathy, and contribution to the greater good. When we focus solely on personal success, we risk overlooking the more meaningful aspects of life, such as cultivating genuine relationships, helping others, and finding a sense of fulfillment in living with integrity. A life spent chasing after fleeting rewards often leads to a deeper sense of emptiness. This is because happiness derived from external sources, such as fame or fortune, is inherently unstable. These things are subject to change, and once the novelty or excitement of a new achievement or possession wears off, we are left with the same underlying sense of longing. Self-centeredness keeps us trapped in a cycle of craving that cannot be satisfied because we are seeking fulfillment in things that are ultimately transient. What's more, because we are focused on acquiring more or achieving more for ourselves, we fail to recognize the richness of life that is already present, the beauty in everyday moments, the joy of simply being alive, and the fulfillment that comes from serving others. The relentless pursuit of self-interest also erodes our ability to find joy in the simple pleasures of life. When we are preoccupied with our own desires, we often miss the small, everyday moments that bring true happiness. Whether it's enjoying a quiet conversation with a friend, witnessing a beautiful sunset, or feeling the warmth of a loved one's embrace, these moments are often overlooked in favor of the next achievement or acquisition. In this way, self-centeredness narrows our focus and limits our capacity to experience joy. Instead of appreciating the richness of life as it is, we are constantly looking ahead to the next goal or accomplishment, never fully present in the moment. This sense of perpetual striving leaves us disconnected from the very things that make life meaningful. By focusing on ourselves, we often miss out on the fulfillment that comes from contributing to something greater than our own personal interests. One of the most profound sources of happiness comes not from what we accumulate for ourselves, but from what we give to others. Acts of kindness, generosity, and service to others create a sense of fulfillment that self-centered pursuits simply cannot match. When we focus on helping others, building relationships, and contributing to the greater good, we tap into a deeper sense of meaning that transcends the temporary pleasures of personal gain. It is through these acts of selflessness that we often find a more lasting sense of joy, one that is not contingent on the ever-changing whims of our desires. To personal relationships, the fulfillment that comes from engaging in a purpose-driven life is another key to long-lasting happiness. When we stop thinking solely about ourselves and instead focus on how we can contribute to the well-being of others, we are more likely to find meaning in our work and our personal endeavors. This is true whether it is in the form of a job that serves others, volunteer work, or simply supporting those around us. The more we focus on the needs of others and how we can make a positive difference in the world, the more we experience a sense of fulfillment that goes beyond self-interest. This sense of purpose provides us with a deeper motivation that is not tied to material gain or external recognition, but to the intrinsic value of helping and uplifting others. The irony of self-centeredness, then, is that the more we focus on our own desires, the further we move away from the sources of lasting happiness. The pursuit of self-interest may lead to temporary pleasure or success, but it will never provide the deep, meaningful fulfillment that comes from genuine connection, purpose, and contribution to the greater good. By shifting our focus from ourselves to others, we open ourselves to a life of greater satisfaction, richer relationships, and a deeper sense of peace. True happiness, it seems, is not found in the endless pursuit of self-interest, but in the willingness to look beyond ourselves and embrace the world and its people in all their complexity and beauty. It is only when we stop thinking so much about ourselves that we can truly begin to live a life that is rich with meaning and fulfillment. A key aspect of overcoming self-centeredness is the transformation of the self through humility. Humility, often misunderstood as a form of self-deprecation or weakness, is actually one of the most powerful forces for personal growth and meaningful engagement with the world. It involves recognizing our own limitations, understanding our interconnectedness with others, and relinquishing the need to constantly assert our importance or superiority. Humility allows us to see ourselves in proper perspective, neither inflated by excessive pride nor diminished by false self-criticism. It is an essential antidote to narcissism and self-obsession because it shifts the focus away from the self and encourages a more balanced and harmonious way of living. Humility is a deep recognition that we are not the center of the universe, nor should we be. In a world where individualism and personal success are often celebrated above all else, humility can be a radical act. It requires us to step back from the constant need to prove our worth, to be acknowledged, or to be admired by others. Instead, humility allows us to live with a quiet confidence in who we are, not because we are seeking the validation of others, but because we are secure in our own understanding of ourselves. When we embrace humility, we stop chasing approval and recognition, and instead begin to live in a way that is authentic and grounded in truth. We no longer feel the need to compare ourselves to others or strive for a position of superiority, because we understand that our value is not dependent on external markers of success. A key component of humility is the ability to recognize our limitations and imperfections. The humble person is fully aware that they are not all-knowing or infallible, and this awareness fosters a sense of openness and willingness to learn. This contrasts sharply with the narcissistic tendency to always be right or to resist feedback from others. When we embrace humility, we are more likely to listen to others' perspectives, acknowledge our mistakes, and grow from our experiences. It is through this openness that we become better equipped to relate to others, build deeper relationships, and make more thoughtful and compassionate decisions. Humility enables us to accept that we are always evolving, and it encourages us to approach life with a sense of curiosity and a willingness to learn from both our successes and our failures. Another vital aspect of humility is recognizing the inherent worth of others. It is only through humility that we can truly begin to appreciate the value of those around us. When we are focused solely on our own needs and desires, it is easy to overlook the contributions and perspectives of others. We may see others as either tools to help us achieve our goals or as obstacles in our way. But through humility, we recognize that every person has intrinsic worth, regardless of their status, wealth, or position. This recognition allows us to treat others with greater respect, kindness, and empathy. Rather than seeing ourselves as superior or separate from others, we begin to understand that we are all part of a larger community, each with unique experiences and valuable insights to offer. Humility allows us to build stronger, more meaningful relationships based on mutual respect and appreciation. Humility also opens the door to service. When we stop thinking so much about ourselves and our own desires, we become more attuned to the needs of others. This shift in focus enables us to serve others with greater generosity and compassion. Service, when driven by humility, is not about seeking recognition or reward, but about contributing to the well-being of others simply because it is the right thing to do. It is through acts of service that we often find our greatest fulfillment, because we are giving without expectation of personal gain. Serving others in a humble manner enriches both the giver and the receiver, fostering a sense of connection and shared humanity. The more we serve, the more we cultivate a sense of purpose that is not rooted in self-interest, but in the well-being of others. Humility, in this sense, becomes a powerful tool for creating a more compassionate and just world. Humility allows us to find peace with ourselves. When we let go of the need to constantly compete or assert our own importance, we release a great deal of mental and emotional strain. Narcissism and self-centeredness often arise from a deep-seated fear of inadequacy or a desire to control how others perceive us. By embracing humility, we free ourselves from this constant inner conflict. We no longer feel the need to prove our worth or to maintain an inflated sense of self. Instead, we are able to accept ourselves as we are, with all our strengths and weaknesses, knowing that we are enough simply by being ourselves. This acceptance brings with it a profound sense of peace, as we are no longer dependent on external validation for our sense of self-worth. The impact of humility extends beyond the individual and can have a ripple effect on communities and societies as a whole. In a world that often values power, status, and individual achievement above all else, humility can be a transformative force. When individuals embrace humility, they are more likely to work together, to listen to others, and to support the common good. Humility fosters collaboration rather than competition, and it encourages a focus on collective well-being rather than individual success. In a society where humility is valued, people are more likely to treat each other with kindness and respect, building stronger, more cohesive communities. Humility fosters an environment where people can be authentic, vulnerable, and supportive of one another, creating a culture of care and connection. At the same time, humility helps to mitigate the harmful effects of arrogance, entitlement, and self-interest. These qualities often lead to division, conflict, and exploitation as individuals or groups prioritize their own needs over the well-being of others. Humility, by contrast, creates space for understanding and empathy, allowing us to see beyond our own narrow perspective and to consider the needs and feelings of others. It is through this deeper understanding that we can work together to address the challenges facing our communities and the world. In embracing humility, we open ourselves to the possibility of greater harmony and cooperation, both in our personal lives and in the broader world. The role of humility in overcoming self-centeredness is not just about personal transformation, it is about cultivating a worldview that recognizes the interconnectedness of all people and the value of service to others. Humility frees us from the narrow, self-serving mindset that limits our potential for growth and happiness. When we live with humility, we allow ourselves to become more attuned to the needs of others, to grow in self-awareness, and to contribute to a more compassionate world. By embracing humility, we learn to value others as much as ourselves and to find fulfillment not in what we can accumulate, but in what we can give. Through humility, we move away from a life focused on the self and toward one that is deeply connected to the larger human experience. Living a life centered around self-interest leads to a profound disconnect from others, as it fosters an environment where we are more focused on what we can gain than on building meaningful, genuine relationships. The pursuit of self-interest, unchecked by empathy or concern for the well-being of others, leads to a society where transactional relationships replace those built on mutual trust, respect, and care. In a world that increasingly values personal success and individual gain, it is easy to overlook the deeper, more fulfilling connections that come from selfless acts of kindness and the willingness to see others as more than mere stepping stones on the path to personal achievement. At the core of every genuine relationship lies the willingness to prioritize the needs of others, sometimes even at the expense of our own desires. This selflessness is not about sacrificing our own well-being or disregarding our needs altogether, but rather about creating a balance where we also recognize the needs of those around us. In a culture that is increasingly driven by competition and comparison, we may find ourselves constantly evaluating our relationships through a lens of what we can gain from them. Do they bring us prestige? Do they serve our ambitions? Do they elevate our social standing? When relationships are evaluated solely based on these criteria, they become shallow and hollow. The focus shifts from true emotional connection to self-serving motives, and as a result, we lose the ability to form lasting, authentic relationships that nourish our souls. One of the key ways that a self-centered mindset damages relationships is by cultivating an environment where others feel used or manipulated. People can often sense when they are being treated as tools to fulfill someone else's desires. When interactions are primarily motivated by personal gain, others may feel as though they are merely a means to an end, not valued for who they are as individuals. This kind of dynamic can lead to feelings of resentment, distrust, and emotional harm. Instead of fostering an atmosphere of support and mutual respect, relationships governed by self-interest create a toxic environment where people feel they must constantly guard against exploitation. Over time, this erodes the sense of security and trust that healthy relationships are built upon, leaving people feeling isolated and disconnected. A life centered on self-interest limits our ability to form deep, emotionally fulfilling relationships. True intimacy in any relationship, whether with family, friends, or romantic partners, requires vulnerability, mutual care, and a willingness to share in each other's joys and struggles. If our primary focus is on our own success or happiness, we may struggle to invest in others in meaningful ways. The narcissistic tendency to view others as extensions of our own desires prevents us from recognizing and appreciating the unique experiences and challenges of those around us. This lack of empathy not only harms the individuals we interact with, but also creates a deep sense of loneliness within ourselves. Despite being surrounded by people, we may find that our relationships feel shallow and unsatisfying because they are ultimately based on what we can take rather than what we can give. In the workplace, a self-centered attitude can similarly lead to dysfunctional and unproductive relationships. When individuals are solely concerned with their own advancement and success, they may undermine or disregard the contributions of others. This can manifest in a variety of ways, from taking credit for others' work to manipulating situations for personal gain. A toxic, competitive atmosphere can arise when people view their colleagues as rivals to be defeated rather than partners with whom to collaborate. This can result in decreased morale, a lack of trust, and a culture where individuals are reluctant to offer help or support to one another. In such environments, productivity often suffers, and the potential for creative collaboration is stifled. In contrast, workplaces that prioritize mutual respect and genuine collaboration tend to be more innovative, productive, and fulfilling, as employees are invested in each other's success rather than solely their own. When self-interest becomes the guiding principle, we also miss out on the greater joy and fulfillment that come from serving others and making a positive impact in their lives. One of the most powerful ways to deepen our relationships with others is through acts of service. Service does not always require grand gestures, but it involves a consistent willingness to put the needs of others above our own, even in small ways. This could be as simple as offering a listening ear to a friend in need, helping a colleague with a difficult task, or providing emotional support during a challenging time. Acts of service build trust and strengthen the bonds between individuals because they demonstrate that we are willing to give of ourselves without expecting anything in return. When relationships are built on a foundation of selflessness, they become far more rewarding and enduring. Instead of a series of transactions, these relationships become genuine partnerships based on mutual care, empathy, and respect. Self-centeredness often prevents us from fully appreciating the richness of diversity in human experience. When we are focused solely on ourselves, we fail to see the value in other people's perspectives. We may dismiss or devalue their ideas, experiences, or contributions because they do not align with our personal interests or goals. However, it is through engaging with the perspectives and ideas of others that we learn, grow, and expand our own understanding of the world. The diversity of thought and experience that each person brings to the table is a rich resource that can enhance our own lives in ways we may never have anticipated. By looking beyond ourselves, we open ourselves up to new insights, deeper connections, and a more fulfilling way of living. The pursuit of self-interest can also distort our priorities and lead us to focus on what is ultimately unimportant. When we are fixated on personal gain, whether it be wealth, status, or material possessions, we begin to place these external markers of success above the intangible qualities that truly matter: love, trust, compassion, and emotional connection. This shift in priorities leaves us vulnerable to a life of emptiness, where we may achieve external success, but still feel unfulfilled. We may acquire everything we think we want, only to find that it does not bring the happiness or satisfaction we expected. This is because the truest, most lasting fulfillment comes not from what we accumulate, but from the relationships we cultivate and the positive impact we have on others.